Welcome to the Executive Coach Podcast. This conversation is for you if you're someone that is really feeling the weight of what is happening right now globally, and you want to show up without burning out, without being in a state of rage all the time. We are currently witnessing unbearable suffering. And with that, for many of us, we will be questioning, we will be doing some soul searching to say, what's my role? What can I actually do? And how am I meant to respond to this? How am I meant to reconcile this with the life that I have in front of me and the way that I'm supposed to think about these things? And I wanted to have a conversation with Fiona about this because her writing has inspired me on this topic. A couple of days ago, we had a beautiful conversation. As we were having it, we wished we had pressed record because there was so much wisdom in that I felt was going to empower me. So a few caveats from my end. This is definitely not a we figured this stuff out conversation. We are both coming from our own lens. And that lens is we're coaches. We're grounded in coaching psychology and positive psychology. And in Fiona's case, purpose work as well as leadership work. In my case, leadership work. And that real question of what can I do in my life with what I have? The other thing I want to say is that, yes, this has been brought to a head by what is currently going on in Gaza, but there is so much more than that going on in the world. I know often that is raised as one of the almost objections around why we should be focusing on this one region, but this shouldn't deflect from what is happening in Gaza just because there are other awful things going on in the world right now. If anything, it should remind us that this conversation is more universal than just what's happening today. And it is really important because it will continue to bubble up. So we're going to have this conversation with care, and we hope that it supports you in staying engaged and aligned with what matters most to you. And I want to hand over to Fiona now to give us some context about what led us up to have this conversation. Hi, Fiona. It's so great to have you here.
No, I am delighted to be here. So how did we end up here today? You texted me on Sunday, being very candid. Myself and Maya know each other well. We have the same masters. And we're like, how are you feeling about everything and what are you doing? And it was a kind of a bid for connection in terms of we both have similar values. We both share the view of the world. And what can we do in a moment when we just feel so helpless? And I said to you, let's have a conversation because I knew it would be helpful for me. And it's a question that I have been sitting with myself in all of my work, but feeling an urgency around it. And I totally get what you said, that there are other things going on in the world, and there are. And I think that the conversation we're going to have today is we need to have a meta view of the person that we want to be in the world, because even if this was rectified or we saw greater intervention tomorrow, there would still be other problems in the world and ways that we want to show up. So I suppose just to caveat that. But I suppose I have been sitting with this again the last few weeks, and it has been coming up for me very strongly in the last few weeks, just because I am oscillating between deep grief, like I was spontaneously bursting into tears, and then like complete rage. I almost smiled then when you said to me in your text, Fiona, you're always so calm and you're always so deliberate in your thinking. And I am, and I suppose I push myself in my work to be that way, but it doesn't mean behind the scenes that I'm not having the very normal human reaction, which is total grief and total rage the next minute about what is happening. So I suppose I want to acknowledge that, because I am going to try and be calm today, and I am going to try and offer some wisdom, but it doesn't mean that I'm not a total human being having a complete human reaction to what is happening in the world around that.
Yeah, I think that's so lovely that you've shared it in that way. And I think the emotion, I was saying to you, had a big cry and then had a nap. Basically, that's my Sunday. And I've been talking about that with people and saying, this is a normal reaction. And then maybe I've corrected myself, say, is it normal or is it just proportionate? So if you are having those feelings, then you're operating in the world and you're seeing everybody else around going about as usual, I guess, not to feel like that you're not normal. Actually, it's just a proportionate reaction that you allowed yourself to experience and feel and let in. And I guess depending on where we are in our lives and our context, we all have different capacities to be able to let that stuff in. Right. And to open that stuff up and I guess crack ourselves open and allow ourselves to feel some of that.
Yeah, and maybe a good place to start is like around the urgency of this issue, and, you know, that we are, and I think say, for example, both me and you feel this need to use our voice. We've both been sharing on social media and to encourage other people to do that. And we're seeing how powerful that is in terms of bringing people together, creating a movement around this. And that is ultimately leading to policy change, because the government, what we're seeing in the last few days, does not happen without that pressure. It is a universal known that the people get there and then they organise and they come together, and that governments will then move, or policymakers will then move when they feel that there is sufficient pressure. Or in this case, I also think that it is probably the combination of how bad the suffering is, how catastrophic it has allowed to become, that kind of combined pressure of the people calling this out again and again, and then how bad it is has forced a number of governments into changing their position on it, which is good. I suppose something we talked about the other day and I feel strongly about is how it can disrupt relationships in your own life, where you feel really strongly about this and you're sharing on social media, and there may be people in your community who are not doing that. And I think, and there's a big call on social media as in saying that your silence is complicit, and to a certain degree I agree with that. Where I see it being slightly dangerous is if we get into a problem where, let's say myself and you are in a local community together, and you are more vocal than I am, or I'm more vocal than you are, and we are having one-to-one conversations which are in battle with the person in our community. One, that is not going to build a relationship with anybody. Secondly, it disrupts our own communities, and that creates more division. And the people who would look to divide us, the people who are creating the wars that we look at, they then win twice because we have disrupted the communities that are thing. And I think that what I'm trying to do, and I say this totally as somebody who has to pull herself back sometimes and say, Fiona, you're not centred enough to have this conversation, is that if we don't have the desire for cohesion at the centre of our conversations, we're not going to get what we want. And I think that is it's a really hard position to hold, and I found it really hard myself. But more fighting, more division, more you versus me in our local communities is just going to, it's not going to get us what we want longer term in terms of a better world. It's not going to get us what we want in terms of reducing polarity. And it's probably not going to get the person that we're having the argument with on side in terms of please join this movement that we have, or please join our desire to use our voice.
So actually, I think what's really interesting here is I've got some other friends who've been asking me, how am I supposed to have these conversations, Maya? And that's something where, what you were talking about there about seeking that cohesion, I actually think we do that very well as coaches, because first response is always the other person. Yes. And hold them in high regard. And that's where I start from. And I do want to learn, and I want to be curious and read from lots of different sides, because I would just want to understand the human experience involved. And so I do think that coaching approach is really useful here, because when we take that, we are holding people in high regard and we're really curious. Of course, we may want to have conversations that move us to a place of more alignment, but I think that almost falls out from when you do start from that point first. Yeah. And then what I think is really powerful for you, Fiona, is that you can then take that level of empathy and understanding and putting yourself into lots of people's shoes into the way that you then communicate on this stuff.
Yeah. And I also think that, and I also go back to the very basic understanding of what I want in my life. I hate people telling me what to do, and I hate people taking the higher moral ground with me. And it is a way to actually push me away from action in the short term. Because I know that I react that way. So I've no doubt that other people react that way as well. And that where I always land with my life is that I believe that I'm here to lead. I believe that we're all here to lead. And to lead is to demonstrate. And I can have one conversation with you, and I can have it in a very even-mannered way. And then I need to leave you alone. And I am going to continue to lead and demonstrate and share and look to inspire you into action. Because I just know that trying to berate you into action is not going to work. And I this on a very human level. I feel differently in terms of how we might deal with our leaders, our political leaders and stuff like that there is always an upward pressure. But within my community, if you're my neighbour or my friend or somebody I run into in the gym, yes, I can have a conversation with you. But I think that people are more likely to be inspired into action rather than be chastised into action, if you like.
Yeah.
So I think on a neighbourly one-to-one level, it's not about not asking people to step forward. It's about understanding that our own, like I shared with you on Tuesday, like some days I just feel like, oh my God, there's red hot anger inside me. And if I have a conversation with anybody from that space, no matter if I was saying to them, white is white, like this is, we all agree on this, that is not going to be a pleasant conversation for them. And I'm not sure that they're going to come over to my side. And I just have to recognize that about my own passion for things and how I can convey things, that I'm not necessarily going to win supporters by doing that.
Yeah.
And there's a really good resource, actually. It's called, I'll share it with you so you can put it in the show notes. It's called No Longer Bystanders. And it's about how this has, in particular because of the urgency and the devastation of what's happening in Gaza, this has activated something in a lot of us. This has really activated something in us that we want to act. We want to start standing up as the citizens that we are, the global citizens that we are. And it is a really good resource for how do you have conversations with people in your life. So when it says things like, are you grounded? Are you able to have this conversation in a meaningful manner at this time? But then it also says, and I really agree with this because I sometimes say it to people when I'm coaching, and then what is the best use of your passion and your desire? Maybe it's not to continue to have that conversation with somebody until they agree with you. I think when we're activated this way, it's asking us, and what are you going to do with how you feel? So absolutely be clear in your position. Absolutely should you have that conversation with friends and family? Yes. But at some point then you have to exit that conversation and go and actually do something yourself as well. So I suppose that, and that's, I just feel strongly that we could end up in and I shared this with you on Tuesday, we could end up in a situation where we're all expending our energy fighting with people who agree with us anyway, instead of expending our energy trying to build coalitions of people towards the world that we want, of which obviously Gaza is probably one of the most urgent because of the humanitarian crisis that is occurring there at the moment as well. So it's not to tell people that you shouldn't be angry, you should be. It's not to say that you shouldn't do something, but to be absolutely deliberate in terms of how you have that conversations and then what action you take, and does that action forward the outcome that you want.
Yes.
And I think that's where the narrative about calling people out is fine. Is there a better? And I think that you can do that lightly. I think that like you can issue an invitation is more the language that I want to use. I think the fact that I'm sharing on socials, that I've written about it a number of times, that I'm here having this conversation, is an invitation for people to join the movement rather than me taking my purpose stick out and beating them over the head until they agree with me, which just for me doesn't feel like that is good for me or my community. But it's more, can I inspire? Can I provide resources? Can I demonstrate through my own leadership the type of world I want and how I want to show up in that world? And then can I inspire them to see that they can do that too? Because sometimes people feel disempowered, as in I don't have any power to change this. And I think the way to show that you do have power is to lead in that manner, to demonstrate in that manner, to inspire in that manner.
Absolutely. So I think you've touched on a lot of really useful stuff there. We've talked about how because I think it is important to address how we are having those conversations locally, right? Because local matters, that's our immediate environment and surroundings, and it has a huge impact on us. So being able to acknowledge that, I think, has been really useful. The other bit that you've shared really openly is your own experience, right? How you experience your own emotions, but then being very clear about then what you take into dialogue with others. I think that's really important because it moves us from a space of just those emotions, right, to then something more constructive. So I think that's really important. Then the final bit here, and we talked about this earlier this week, is because you speak, right? So you're doing, and you talk about how you want to make sure people don't feel judged and they feel empowered. And I think that is really important. The final bit that is important here, though, and I think it is what can keep people stuck, is that, but what can I do? So a number of conversations I've had with people, they've said, it's deep, it's sick, making me feel physically nauseous. It's also out of my hands. People feel basically absolutely impacted, but they don't feel like they have any control. And I think this moves us quite nice, this part of the conversation that we were talking about around what's your dharma and what sorts of things we can do. So I wonder if we should start with a sort of almost more practical element of like, where can we start with some of this?
I suppose the first thing I want to say about that is I want to dispel the idea that you have no power. Of course you have power. And I think that if I was to empathize with anybody who thinks that, I probably thought that years ago in my own life as well. Can I change a system? Can I do this? And I have a friend of mine who's a sociologist, and she really influences me. And she's just, who's the system? We are the system. That's what societies, cultures, local communities are. We're a group of, where we come together and we create the system. The idea that you don't have power as an individual is culturally constructed, and it's your job to unconstruct that in your mind. And I'm a big believer in you get to shine your little piece of the cosmos, and that has an impact on everybody else. And if we do that well, that's how the world changes. That we always start out as small groups, and then we become a movement, and then so on and so forth. But if you're an individual thinking, look, I've never even engaged with any of this before, I think the first thing to do is to start to question that own internal power dynamic about I have no power. And then to really sit with what are small things that I can do. So in the case of what's going on in the Middle East, you can write to your politicians. That's a very easy thing to do. There's loads of resources online where people have crafted the letters for you, and you can adjust the letters if you want to change some of the wording. They're small things. If you feel called, you can get involved in movements or protests or anything like that. There are small incremental steps that you can take. But I think the bigger inquiry, and I think this is the call of our time, and I thought that before what has happened in the last 2 years, is the question I often ask audiences is who am I and who do I want to be in the world? And that's what something like this activates in us all. In my life, it happened. All of a sudden, I just started to feel this inner calling of what am I doing? I have all of these talents, and am I directing them in the right way? And what happens when we have something as catastrophic as what's happening at the moment is a collective activation is almost happening. So it's happening to a lot of us at the same time. But the question is the same. How, and I remember asking myself these questions as well, how have I ended up in a world where the power dynamics are this way? How have I ended up in a world where inequality is growing? How have I ended up in a world where we know about the climate crisis, but nobody is taking real action towards changing it? And I have to then ask myself, and what are you going to do about this, Fiona? And you won't have all the answers tomorrow. And I'd be at pains to tell people, don't expect yourself to wake up tomorrow morning with all the answers of what you're going to do. But the reason that you're starting to think like this is the inquiry has been triggered in you about the person that you want to be in the world and how you want to use your talents in service of a better world. And I think that's something we could collectively all agree with, no matter whether we feel we can do something or not, whether we feel we have started to do something or not, whether we're comfortable sharing on social media or not. I think most of us, and particularly those who are probably listening to this video, we want a better world. We see all the problems. And that is going to take all of us to start doing something and living in greater alignment with the world that we want to see. That's how it's made real, that we make it real. We make purpose real. It's not something out here. It's not something that leaders will just manifest on their own. It will come from each of us being able to answer that question and to make changes and just disrupt the way we're living and passively agreeing to the world as it is.
Absolutely. What I love about talking to you, Fiona, is that as I sit there and listen to you, I move from a state where I might be feeling more frustrated and stuck to a where I'm like, okay, reminding me and others that everybody in their own unique way can make a difference. And it's I guess in some way a cheesy line, but it's never more true than now. So from my perspective, I think we've been on a bit of a journey in this conversation from what people might be experiencing today, locally, online, and how we can navigate that stuff in a way that I guess we can move ideally to a more constructive place when we're ready to, right? So it may not be that we're in a hurry to do that. We may need to sit in that emotion and experience it. We've then talked about a lot of what this can activate in us. And I love the way that you've described this collective activation, as well as, I guess, not trying to create division in the way that we communicate around this, and acknowledging that the way we communicate about this might be different to the way that we might be feeling, and that we may need to be mindful in that space. But what I'm really excited about here is now, go on.
I was just going to say, I think that in relation to how we communicate with people, and I feel this myself, I can be in a really calm state and then I log on to social media and I'm watching, in live time, what is happening. And all of a sudden my calm state is just gone. And then obviously I'm sharing and I'm trying to be really mindful about what I share and what the source of what I share is and stuff like that. I go to a lot of effort to be okay, who is posting this? Because if I share something of there and all of that. But by the end of it, I feel completely activated. So there is it's very hard then. If you spend 20 minutes on social media today and you want to bear witness to what is happening, you're also in no state to have a conversation with somebody when you come off the platform. So, and I think that you just have to acknowledge that social media is also very binary and it's very shouty in terms of how we're communicating with each other. And that type of communication is not suitable for somebody who's standing in front of you, your neighbour, somebody who's in your local community. And I think that we have to make that distinction between I'm very activated and there's a lot of shouting going on social media, as there should be. This is an absolute catastrophe and it is incredibly urgent. I'm not trying to take away from that, but it doesn't mean if you go and buy milk 5 minutes later and you meet someone in the supermarket that the same level of aggression should be in that conversation. And I suppose that's the distinction I'm trying to make, because I have to make that distinction in my own life. Because if you caught me 5 minutes after I come off and I had been witnessing some of those, like I couldn't be responsible for half the things I would come out with. And I have to manage that in my own life. So that's the distinction I'm trying to make, is that we don't win. We don't win if we damage our own relationships, and we don't win if we damage our own communities. Then there's just more polarization and more division in the world. And I think that it's very hard. It takes a lot of grounding practices and self-awareness to be able to make that distinction, but we have to, because that's part of creating the better world as well.
Yes. No, I'm so glad you added that in. I just want to summarize what you've said, because I think it's so important. You've highlighted the distinction between that very attention grabbing, often extremely psychologically driven marketing, basically, style that we experience on social media. And it can be, like you say, it can be really necessary and useful, but that is a different wavelength than the one that we need to or wish to be in when we're either having these conversations locally or in person with those in our who are not on our algorithm, right? They're in their own, or they may not even be on social media. And we want to make that distinction. So you've made the distinction between online and IRL, but also between how we want to be constructive and versus our own emotional experience, and being able to separate those. And I just want to share that for me as part of, as I said, that sort of coaching mindset of seeking to understand and then of course create change, right? Because in a coaching conversation, we want to move people forward. It is a powerful thing, but it doesn't mean that you as the individual doing that or having those conversations won't have your own emotional experience. And I do feel that's where, as coaches, we have supervision, we have places where we can go in and offload that. If you're a therapist, you have a of care and support, and we need to acknowledge our own experience. So I personally find it valuable to then be able to have conversations where I vent as well. And I do find that's important, but not to blur the boundaries and get confused between those conversations and the ones that are maybe going to be able to create more of a positive change and impact.
Yeah, and I suppose to add to that, because I agree with you as a coach, having courageous conversations is, I suppose, part of my value system in life, and I really want to be able to do that. But I suppose, how can I do that is the other question I could ask. Because people often say, oh, Fiona, you're so calm and you're so this. I'm none of those things. I have a very fiery personality, so I have to manage myself as well. And part of courageous conversations is to do them with finesse. So again, that the invitation is there for people. So something I've written about a number of times is when people say, oh, I don't like to talk about that, or they're not topics I talk about. And a big one would be, we never talk about politics and religion. That would have been an old kind of wives' tale or an old way. And the reply I often give to that is, the only thing that wins when we don't talk about politics and religion is the status quo. The only thing wins is the powers that be. So it's very convenient for the world as it is, the systems as they are, the inequality as it is, if we don't talk about things that matter, of which politics and religion matter to a lot of people, and other topics as well. So my invitation to anybody listening to this is, you don't win if we don't talk about this. So it is a skill set that we all have to develop. And that's why when I'm having conversations, and I'm not always great at this, is that I'm trying to be in a conversation that the other person does not feel alienated, that the other person does not feel like that they're just trying to exit stage left. Like, why is this crazy person giving out to me about this situation in the world? And if we can develop that kind of that narrative, that ability to hold dialogue, that's how we make change. Because the world isn't made better just by talking to people that agree with you. The world is being made better by able to have these dialogues. And that is the skill of courageous conversations, is always about topics that we don't want to talk about. And I think that,
Absolutely.
I suppose that is totally the skill of within coaching, and that is a skill that anybody can learn. But it's about being willing to enter a conversation looking for a collective outcome. And definitely the world is asking for that from us right now. And again, if we look at within our communities, if we want to grow these movements, if we want to build people, invite people into these things that we care about, they have to feel welcome and not alienated. And we need to just grow that collective ability to talk about all of these tough topics, because actually lack of talking about them is what's led us into this mess on multiple levels to date.
I think you have really hit the nail on the head with that. And the reminder that we are in echo chambers. Each and every one of us in our social media is in our own little echo chamber, where the things that we are engaging with and not scrolling past quickly are being emphasized and exaggerated and then being amplified for us. We step off that and we go into the real world, where it's not about making statements, it's not about just catching attention, but as you say, it's about connection, dialogue, and moving to the other side, looking into the whites of people's eyes and wanting that connection. So we've got two very different mechanisms for how to relate to people and how to connect and how to have an impact there. And I think I just wanted to emphasize that distinction as well.
Yeah, and I suppose if I add one more thing, if I had my way, I'd get off social media completely. I don't really feel it adds anything to my life. But however, it is currently my main news flow for topics that matter. Like, I hear about stuff that is happening, particularly in Gaza, or other, let's call it breaking news, or big changes in the world are now being reported on social media. So I find it really difficult to understand how I can protect my mental health and be off it, but also be aware and understanding what is happening in the world, because we're not always getting that just from reading traditional media, for example. So that is something that I struggle with myself, and I know that your research, your master's research, was into social media and well-being, basically. And this was probably before we started seeing a lot of this, what is happening in the world today.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, already there was polarization going on and it was being used, politically, etc. But now, as I said to you recently, because it's just that the posts are getting more and more emotive and I'm getting more and more worked up, so that I know if I am going to go on there, because I do other activity on there, but if I'm going to go on there, then I have to take a deep breath and know what I'm getting into. I have to be so mindful before I go on there. Emphasize that. I'm going to leave.
And I think, I was just going to say that's a good place to end, because ultimately what you're saying there is I'm feeling this emotion to want to act all the time. And then my response to you, we were talking to on the phone the other day, was, and then what, Maya? What will you do with that feeling that you need to act? And I think that's what we're going to discuss in the next conversation, is how do I channel all of these big feelings that I'm having that are the correct emotion to feel, but how do I channel that into something that can make a difference in the world?
Absolutely. Beautifully concluded there. So we're going to wrap up for today, and we're then going to come back with part 2 of this conversation with Fiona to deepen what we've started to touch on today. So thank you so much, Fiona.
Thank you.
And I look forward to connecting with you all next time. Bye-bye.